Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest Women in Project Management Network presentation. Um, Women in Project Management is a group within the Australian Institute of Project Management, which I know quite a few of you are aware of. We are supportive of women becoming project managers, sharing our stories positively to support each other in developing as project managers. This morning we have Fiona and Kate, although Kate's is identified as Fiona there. Oh, look, there we go. It's changed. We've got Fiona and Kate coming to talk to us about imposter syndrome and how to overcome that. I'm not going to do introductions for Kate and Fiona. I'm also not going to do my normal acknowledgement of country, and that will all make sense as they start their presentation. So I'm going to throw straight to both of you and leave you to it, and I'll jump back at the end. Just before I do that, I will say to everybody, if you have any questions at any point in time, please put them into the Q&A section, and we will get to them at the end. There may be some points where Fiona and Kate ask you for some input, so please feel free to add that into either the chat or the Q&A if that happens. Over to you, Kate and Fiona. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Karen. Welcome. Delighted to be here and delighted to be sharing this topic with you. We've had the joy of sharing this with many groups of women, and we know that it resonates strongly. As Karen said, we're going to encourage you to be interactive. Please share comments in the chat feed or ask questions there or in the Q&A. Firstly, as Karen said, we will do an acknowledgement of country to acknowledge the traditional owners on the lands on which we gather today. In my case, I'm very fortunate to be in the land of the Gadigal people. And we pay our respects to elders past and present. Kate and I are the co-authors of a book called Core Confidence, and also the facilitators of our program, which is a Women in Leadership program, Acts of Confidence. And our work in this space really started because we're both corporate backgrounds ourselves, worked then in culture and leadership change, and noticed this gap around the great work that was being done to give people tools to do things, and in particular women, and yet the reluctance to actually take them and use them. And so this piece around, I know what I should do, but there's something holding me back. And that holding me back was often a voice in your head, sometimes called the imposter syndrome, sometimes called inner critic. And that was standing in the way of women achieving all that they wanted to do and all they were capable of. And so we really started to orient around that work to build some resources and tools. Firstly, the book, which is a very much a self-coaching guide to being able to reconnect to your core confidence, and then our work with the program to resource women at a deeper layer around this particular topic. Kate, I'll get you to say hi too.
Yeah, hi everyone. Really lovely to be here. Excuse me if I've got a puppy barking in the background. He's 5 months old and playing with God knows what. But as Fiona said, this work really orientated around the conversation and whether it's self-belief, imposter syndrome, inner critic. Interestingly, we did some work back in 2020. It timed with, coincidentally, with COVID and lockdowns. And it was challenging. We had over 1,000 women through the program. And this piece around inner critic, self-belief, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, we hold some of that language is interchangeable in terms of how people hold it. But what we know is this piece around doubting my capability, feeling like others see capability in me that I don't see myself, we know plays out significantly for lots of women. It led to us writing the book that you see on screen there, Core Confidence. That then led to us creating the program Acts of Confidence, which was in 2020 as well. And one of the key philosophies that I would encourage you to write down and to hold a little bit as something to dig into a little bit deeper yourselves is that the act of confidence comes before the feeling of confidence, hence the name, the Acts of Confidence program. But really starting to think about what is it what's the benchmark, the formula I have in my head? Many of us are waiting to feel 100 or 150% confident before we take action. That hooks into the conversation around imposter syndrome, because how do I know I'm not imposter? Like, what is the level of confidence that I need to have that would tell me that I'm not an imposter? And so a big part of the opportunity today for you is to start to raise your self-awareness around your relationship with confidence, because absolutely they're interchanged with inner critic and imposter syndrome. But equally, how does this imposter syndrome play out for you? I suspect if it wasn't a thing for you, you wouldn't be here. So if you're here, it's because something about the topic really resonated for you. So we really want to invite you to, as we share some of our key points today, to reflect on where you're at, and then equally thinking about what's something you can do when you leave here today. We are very focused in our work on making sure that it's not just interesting, that it's useful. And in our experience, things become useful when we take action. And that's one thing I could do differently, to be able to start to, really show up differently, experience things differently, and change my relationship with imposter syndrome, inner critic, and self-doubt.
Beautiful. I think that, Pete, we want to start with, what is imposter syndrome? What's going on for us when we get offered an opportunity? We maybe get tapped on the shoulder for a role. We step into a new role. We start in a new project group, and we already are quite talented. We've already demonstrated value, because we wouldn't be in that position unless we had. And yet there's this sneaking underlying voice that's saying, but are you really? Are you really good enough for this? Are you really capable of doing this? Do you really have what it takes? What if you're showing up? And all of this undermining self-talk really feeds into this sense that, I could be an imposter. And it's often, even though, there's been a lot of debate about imposter syndrome, we hear it constantly, not just from women, also from men. And, it definitely plays out for both, but it does seem to be a big factor in the way that women navigate their careers, and what is stopping them from really participating in the way they know they potentially could. And I think you'll see there's a definition on screen here. That despite the outstanding academic, professional accomplishments, women who experience the imposter phenomenon persist in believing that they are really not that bright, and they've fooled anyone who thinks otherwise. So you can see there, it's not a great feeling, because it feels as though, that I'm pretending, but not only that I've fooled other people into thinking things, which is really undermining of our confidence.
Yeah, I think we, in our work, and actually the orientation of the work and the book very much came back to what our sources of confidence are. And the book is written around really starting to think about, like, how do I know I'm confident? Like, what is my go-to strategies? And, work hard and know your stuff are two of the major sources of confidence for many of us. It's unsustainable the more senior you get, because you can't know everything, nor can you study everything. But this piece around despite, and it was certainly our experience and the experience of our clients, many of us have a belief that if I study more, I do more, I know more, that will equal confidence, or that will equal, me not feeling like an imposter. So our solution to the imposter syndrome is go and acquire more. And we know that even when we do that, the imposter syndrome will still be present, because imposter syndrome has its roots in uncertainty. It has its roots in fear, because it's a fear of not being able to answer the question. And you can get as many qualifications as you want. We're huge advocates of ongoing learning, but you can get as many qualifications as you'd like. And there is still a risk that you'll go into a room and not be able to answer a question. Now, you could argue quite rightly that that risk goes down, and the rate with which the world is changing. I think about that strategy as something sort of a decade ago, maybe had a far bigger chance of working. But in today's world, where things can change like that, right? New data, new reports, new tools, all sorts of things. If we want to go think about the way AI is changing, the way with which we acquire information, digest information, disseminate information, it can be easy now to be an expert, but not be across all of the detail. And so the roots of imposter syndrome very much sit in fear. And so we'll talk more about this later, but part of the opportunity here is actually our ability to recognize fear, right-size fear. We call a lot of around name it to tame it. So that if we do go into a room and we do get asked a question that we can't answer, we don't feel like an imposter. We have good expectations on ourselves, which is, yes, I'm an expert, but I'm not, across every detail, and that's okay. And so there's a big piece around expectation management on us here. I think useful just to orientate the conversation around imposter syndrome to how it shows up for other women. So there was a good piece of research done quite a while ago now. But our hypothesis would be, this would still stand in terms of results by virtue of the conversations we have, right? 75% of female executives across a variety of industries have experienced imposter syndrome. Again, we know that that's true by virtue of the conversations we're having with women regularly, which is a feeling of inadequacy and self-doubt that makes them question if they are qualified enough despite having significant education. And that nearly half say their feelings of self-doubt result from never expecting to reach the level of success they have achieved, which I think is interesting as we share that. I'd love for you to reflect yourself personally on that stat. And 56% have been afraid that they won't live up to the expectations or that people around them will not believe they are as capable as they expected. It's curious. I was doing an interview with one of our clients the other day, and she said she got promoted, and she said, right at the beginning, I just kind of felt like, I didn't believe that I couldn't understand what they saw in me. Like I couldn't align. And I kept feeling like, for the first couple of months while I was in the role, I kept feeling like they were going to come up and say, oh no, we've made a mistake. You're not the person, and you don't have the skill, capability, and experience that we thought you did. And we know, not a single example of that. In fact, of the thousands of women I've talked to over the years, there's only been a handful, I'd say 2 or 3 of women who I've talked to who have ended up being in roles where they didn't have the capability to do the role. And in both of those scenarios, they were pushed into the role by their organisation, and they said, I'm not ready yet. I don't think I'm up for this, both times. And both times they were kind of forced into it. And it didn't end well. And, again, being across more of the detail of the scenarios, it really seemed more like a political play and a scapegoat scenario than it did for any other reason. I think what's useful when we start to think about this is this isn't just, women like you and me who have this experience. The more that you actually start to look at and dig into this phenomenon, there are women in all parts of the world, in all industries, all walks of life that have experienced imposter syndrome in some form.
Yeah, I think this is a really beautiful piece, is it doesn't matter where we're from or how much we've done. For the vast majority of women, this is playing out in some form. And I think, you see on screen here 3 very famous people. There's Michelle Obama saying, I had to overcome that question, am I good enough? When speaking about, when she was at Princeton, it dogged me for most of my life. Many women and girls walk around with this question in their mind. Am I good enough? Am I up for this? Have they made a mistake? Sheryl Sandberg talks about, that she believed that, she'd fooled everyone yet again, and that one day soon the jig would be up, that idea that I'll be found out, that I'll be found to be lacking, going on in a very big way. And then we've got Maya Angelou, whose quotes are used extensively, particularly for her work around really defining the capability and the power of women. But, she wrote so much. But she said, every time that I go to write a book, I face that yellow pad. The challenge is so great. I've written 11 books, but each time I think, oh, they're going to find out. No, I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out.
Yeah, I think it's always helpful to hear. And, I'd encourage you to open up a dialogue with other women in your world to see how this is present for you. In terms of some of the comments we hear, it can look like saying yes to a task, a project, a promotion when you really want to say no, to prove your value. It can look like telling yourself you're not ready or it's not the right time to pursue an opportunity, even though you are. And it is. I think this one's always really interesting. We say if you're ready, you're too late, right? It should feel uncomfortable. You know, you should have a learning opportunity or a growth zone or a learning edge when you go into new roles. The first 30, 60, 90 days should feel like you're out of your comfort zone. I often say if you're not out of your comfort zone in that window, then you're probably in the wrong role, because if you get super comfortable really quickly, then after 12 months, you're going to kind of be bored. Like, it's likely you'll be bored. It can look like despite strong performance, you struggle to experience success on the inside. This is this self-talk. And we've heard lots of women, in fact, in the research for the book, lots of women talked about, now, everyone looks at me and thinks I sound confident, but inside I don't feel confident at all. And so many examples of women that have come through our program and done our work who, even myself, right, I've known some of these women for a long time. And again, outside looking in, super confident. And some of the dynamics of what was going on meant that imposter syndrome was absolutely showing up for them at different points throughout their life. What we know is that this isn't in every context. It can be in specific contexts, particularly, new contexts, of course. What we know is self-doubt, inner critic, imposter syndrome will often get louder when we are in spaces where there is far more uncertainty. So when uncertainty increases, then self-doubt and imposter syndrome increases, right? They're linked. If I was to put you in, doing the same role with the same people in the same organization with the same systems for 2 or 3 years, self-doubt, imposter syndrome would be quite low, right? Because you have nearly probably 95, 100% certainty. Every problem that's come up, you've solved. And so you know what's ahead, right? You have certainty, and self-doubt is low. Step into new environments, new roles, new workplaces, new industries. There is a ton of uncertainty. And so self-doubt and imposter syndrome increases. That doesn't mean you say no to those opportunities. It means that you resource yourself to navigate through them. And that's a big part of our work. And the final one, a persistent feeling of falling short or not being good enough, of often unrealistic expectations. And I really want to catch this. Managing expectations on ourselves is a huge part of our work, right? Because we often expect far more of ourselves than we would expect from anyone, our friends, our peers, our direct reports. We often have a higher benchmark or a higher expectation, and that, in our experience, can be part of the problem, right? Even the scenario I talked earlier about expecting to be able to answer every question. It is highly unlikely that your stakeholders, even if you are a subject matter expert, expect you to be able to answer every question and every distinction. It is highly likely that they are aware of there'll be things that you're not able to answer, especially in the moment, but you are resourced to be able to go and figure that out.
Yeah, there's so many ways in which our self-talk, what goes on in our brains, is undermining our sense of self. And this is the piece where we end up thinking that we're imposters, even though the people around us know we're not, even though generally the people who promoted us, who gave us opportunities, they know what's required in the role. They also know, what you bring to the table, and they've got faith in you. You can do this. And yet we start undermining ourselves by having these thoughts, these ideas. And they're not necessarily true, but we've repeated them so often, we've started to believe them.
Yeah. I just want to try. I do have a video I wanted to play, and it was actually from that client I was thinking of, but I think we can't share sound for some reason, so we'll keep moving. But I'll kind of paraphrase it for you. Phoebe, who is on screen, and I might try and get you the link and drop it in her stories on our YouTube channel. But Phoebe and I have known each other for years. She's in professional services, and she was absolutely one of the many women who say, everyone looked at me and thought I look like and sound confident, but inside I didn't feel confident at all. She lives in regional Victoria. She was returning from mat leave and just, struggling with, identity, expectations of self, expectations of from others as well. And again, a big part of her journey through AOC was really about being kind to herself, calibrating the expectations of, what success looked like in the office, and what it looked like at home as well, and being able to understand her value proposition, and calibrating, how she was showing up in certainly those early weeks as she returned from mat leave, but even beyond, as she's come through the program again. I think I really want to catch an important piece, which is the cost of imposter syndrome. I say it's important because it's easy to kind of just hold this as a thing that's unhelpful in our world, and to spark you, inspire you, motivate you, leverage you to take a small act of confidence when you leave here, to do something different. We have to understand what it's costing us. And it's significant when we think about the time of procrastination, thinking about things. This often plays out, clients talking about, I've got something to say in a meeting, and I'm procrastinating, I'm thinking about it, will I, won't I, and then someone else says it. And in the words of one of our other clients, she says, it didn't sound stupid when they said it, but for some reason in my head, I thought it sounded stupid, right? But the time, not just in micro moments in terms of how we're operating in the day-to-day, but I really want to catch the time from career progression. In our experience, certainly in the last 18 months, it's become very clear to me that there are two reasons why our career progression, women's career progression, is slower than we would like. Number one, we're not clear about what we want. And number two, we're not talking about it. Right? We're not getting out there, and we're not telling others. And then there would be absolutely a third, which is, and we're waiting. We're waiting to be ready, right? We're waiting for this magic formula in our head that says, when I've got the relationships, when I feel like I can answer all the questions, when I feel like I've got that 100 or 150% confidence, like, let's be real, we're wanting more than 100% confidence, that's when I'll take action. And so there is a cost in terms of pace of career progression. There is absolutely a cost in terms of, I'm going to call it productivity and efficiency in the day-to-day as well.
There's a big cost in terms of visibility. So how visible I am, how recognized, how seen I am for what I bring to the table, for the talents I hold. And again, this is where we've done some work to undermine what it is we actually have. And we've started to question whether we actually have value, whether we're bringing value, whether we're contributing in a way that's useful. But the cost of this around you is when we don't believe in ourselves, when we have that self-doubt, that imposter syndrome, that inner critic going on, we do very often hold back. We might be quite well known in our immediate team and with our immediate leader, but it's very rare that we make ourselves seen to the broader organizational context and potentially some of the industry people. And so starting to understand that this imposter syndrome holds us back from being visible, from being seen, from being recognized. And that has a huge impact on the kind of opportunities that come our way, the sort of projects we get offered, the way in which we're seen by others, and career opportunities. All of these things are far less when we are not seen and we're not visible.
Yeah, and that has a corresponding impact, of course, on salary. Right? And we don't talk a lot about money necessarily, except to say that a lot of the choices we're making are impacting the pace of career progression, are impacting pay rises, and promotion opportunities and secondment opportunities. And so when we start to stack this, when we're waiting to be ready, and, we wait a year, we're not ready yet. I often say two people who are in pipeline for a career progression opportunity. One feels that they're not ready yet, whether that's skill, capability, whether that's timing. And again, all of those can be true. We're not discounting any of that. And in our experience, quite often fear takes hold in those moments, whether it's imposter syndrome, whether it's fear of not getting the opportunity, whether it's fear of it's getting it and stuffing it up. Fear can take over and can try and protect us, right? Can try and convince us that we're not ready. But two people, right? One says, I'm not ready yet. I need another year. The other says, oh, kind of got 7 out of 10 of what I need. I'm going to put my hat in the ring and have a go, right? And so that person who takes imperfect action, right? I'm not ready yet, but I'm going to have a go. I back myself, gets the opportunity. A year later, we move from having a confidence gap to having a competence gap, right? Because this person now has a year's experience in that new role, a year's worth of new skill, capability, experience that is increasing their professional currency, increasing their professional assets. And now when those two candidates are compared from a merit perspective, this person is ahead from a merit perspective, right? And so we really want to think about how imposter syndrome is playing out, what it's costing us, not just in time and relationships and money, but equally in energy. And for me, this is the biggest part, right? The amount of headspace and emotional energy that imposter syndrome takes up. You know, Katie Dodd, who's one of our alumni, talks about, you know, I'd sit in meetings and I'd have decisions to make, and I'd be procrastinating on decisions that weren't overly significant, or deferring those decisions where I could have just made that decision and moved on. And so, you know, the energy now that she is giving to those smaller, insignificant pieces is all but gone, which has allowed her the energy to focus on the bigger strategic tasks in her role that likewise now helps her build skill, capability, and experience and increases her professional value.
Yeah, I think this is when we consider all of the amount of time, energy, the lack of visibility, the cost financially, it is a huge thing to let this imposter syndrome, this self-doubt, this inner critic be driving so much of how we show up and what we do. And as Kate was saying, this energetic piece, it is such a big toll because our brains are full, our bandwidth is compromised, our ability to do great work is compromised because we're sucked into these never-ending questions about whether I'm going to be good enough or found out or someone's going to realize I'm an imposter. I think they're, you know, all super important. I did just want to catch, Tony, thank you for your question. We will come to that. We've got a Q&A bit at the end. If you have questions or comments, maybe pop them into the Q&A because Kate and I can see those. We can't see the chat feed. And I just did want to check with Karen if there was anything in the chat feed we need to be made aware of before. Next, Pete.
I'll just jump in quickly. The chat feed is just for us, it turns out. So the participants only have the Q&A section.
Perfect. All right. So if anyone's got comments or questions, pop them into that Q&A. We can all see them and we can get to that as we go through.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And really want to take your questions at the end. So please pop them in. It allows us to go deeper, wider, and share more of, you know, the experience that we have now, having spent many, many years in this conversation. So what's going on? I said self-doubt is present. Imposter syndrome is present when uncertainty is present, right? And so the brain wants to fill the uncertainty gaps. Our brain just kind of circles in this, what we call the what if spiral. You know, in the scenario where I'm being approached, or I've been approached and I'm put into a role where I feel like I don't have the skill, capability, experience, a big part of that is present because I'm not clear about, quite likely, I'm not clear about what they think is required to be successful, right? You know, I know, and I think it's a really interesting one in terms of the brain, right? In theory, we are the ones that are better positioned to be able to articulate our skill, capability, experience in an appropriate way. That said, women often underestimate our own skill, capability, experience, and overestimate what's required to do a good job. So if I think about Katie, you know, she was in that scenario when she was approached to be promoted into a leadership role. She underestimated her own skill, capability, experience, and overestimated what she thought was required to be successful, right? So there's this big confidence gap. And what we know, and a big part of our work, is when you can, active competence number 2, articulate and share your value. And so you can, you know, take a reality check of your skill, capability, experience, and then you can right size what's required to be successful. You are already where you need to be. And so it's the uncertainty in our experience between what I think is required to be successful, what I think my stakeholders believe my skill, capability, experience to be, and what I believe my skill, capability, experience to be, is why the imposter syndrome, right? That's why there's this gap in perspectives, which is a big part of what's going on when we think about imposter syndrome. And what we know is very rarely do those stories reflect reality, right? Often they're fueled by rumination, they're fueled by fear for good reason. And many times in that moment where fear can take over, the safest thing to do is to retract, right? The safest thing is to say, oh, I'll you know, I won't talk, ask that question in this forum. I'll go and have a conversation with someone, you know, that person later in a one-to environment. And of course, I want to acknowledge there's times when that's appropriate, but there's, you know, lots of times when asking a question, sharing a perspective in an open environment actually is important, because it could facilitate a conversation. And importantly, it can help you be visible to key stakeholders who are sitting around that table.
Yeah, I think just as you're listening here, noticing any of these things that are going on for you, that what if spiral is so prevalent for so many of us. If we already have a bit of a belief that perhaps we are an imposter, that we can't actually do it, and we get in a room and then we see, you know, there's maybe 20 people, it's a big meeting, and we start speaking about something and a couple of people start talking, you know, and in the corner, or they're laughing or something's going on, our brain immediately starts going towards that. Oh, I'm going to be found out. Oh, they're thinking this about me. Oh, that's going on. We've got all of these stories that we start conjuring up in our mind that start to provide evidence that, oh, I am an imposter. So that's the reinforcing that goes on. But what we've seen time and time again is that those stories don't reflect reality, that they are something our brain has made up in that moment when we've seen something we don't understand. We've jumped in with a hypothesis, an idea of what it is. We've made that the reality, and we're reacting as though that's true. We don't know what's happening over there, but we've decided this. And these kind of fast reactions, these neural pathways that exist, they're there because usually of something that happened a long time ago. And we're seeking to, in this moment, at least give myself the certainty, and at least, you know, I react to that fear, and we usually take the worst possible story, the worst possible case it could be. And understanding that that's normal for our brains to do that. However, because of neuroplasticity, we can actually rewire our brains. It does take a little bit of work, but we do not have to always fall down this rabbit hole of filling the uncertainty gaps with a story that actually makes us feel worse.
Yeah, and I think that's, in most cases, it's just a habit, right? A big part of our work is about being kind to ourselves. It's easy as you dig into this stuff to kind of start to beat yourself up, and it's just super unhelpful, right? We really want to be kind to ourselves. We really want to challenge some of the expectations and beliefs that are deeply ingrained, right? That's why, you know, our work is not a one and done conversation. This session today isn't going to magically cure you of imposter syndrome. We joked early in our journey of writing the book that if we had a magic confidence pill, you know, we'd be billionaires, right? Because if we could just change it like that, you know, wouldn't that be amazing? But we are working on beliefs, assumptions, default behaviors that in many cases have been operating beneath the surface for years. And so the work we're seeking to do, his belief change, is to shift your mindset, to challenge some of these stories, to challenge some of these expectations that you're setting on yourself around, you know, what does ready look like? what does need to be present in order for me to feel like I can put my hat in the ring for a role. And we've got, so many different examples of clients who have been through the program, who have been willing to put their hat in the ring for promotion cycles early, because they want the experience, they want the feedback, so that they can position themselves for the next promotion cycle, and absolutely been ready, and then had the experience where they've been promoted early because they've had the courage to put their hat in the ring, and just to recalibrate some of their beliefs, assumptions, default behaviors around how they show up in the world. And that's where we can start to fast track ourselves from that elongated career progression, because of all of the time of waiting, or the sunk cost time of waiting, to be able to be willing to put our hat in the ring. That takes courage, right? Because we're not always going to get the answer or the outcome that we like. What I will say, though, is you'll at least get some feedback that will support you to understand what it is that you need to work on. That will position you, will help you be in a far stronger position when you go through that promotion cycle a second time. What I will say is we've been talking a lot about fear. And if you do want to download a chapter of the book that I've got in my hands, face fear is one of the most powerful pieces of work that we facilitate for our clients. I think it's far deeper than we ever thought when we wrote the book back in 2018. But you can click on that QR code if you do want to download that chapter. It'll take you through very much our early thinking of this. But one of the things that has the potential to completely transform your life is redefining your relationship with fear and failure. As I said earlier, imposter syndrome is rooted in our fear of not being perfect, our fear of getting it wrong, our fear of not being good enough, our fear of being judged. And all of those fears are human to have. And we won't go into it too much in today's session. It's certainly, it's deep work and it's complex work. But your ability to redefine your relationship with fear and failure, to see fear not as a stop sign, but as a signal that says, hey, you need to dig a little bit deeper. You need to access some resources to be able to navigate through here. Bea, anything else you want to add there?
I think just this piece around, if you notice imposter syndrome playing out for you, what we know is sitting below the surface is a whole lot of fear. These two things are inextricably linked, and so there is this chapter would be very valuable for you. It's got some good self-coaching questions, so it can start you on that piece that Kate's talking about reframing that. Margaret, thanks for making a comment around, some of these beliefs, these ideas, these default assumptions, they have been with us since we were small girls or small people. And so they have been reinforced over time. Various, we've had interactions at schools and in our homes, in our social circles, all different ways that have heightened that fear response, heightened that sense that I'm not going to be okay, or it's unsafe to speak up, or I'm going to be found out as an imposter. So they're quite deeply wired, which is why, this stuff, it's not just we can't just fix it all in one webinar. We can absolutely give you some tools to resource you. And as Kate said, take an action step away, which is the start of how you deal with it. But this is something that, we want you to come back to a number of times and to take action over time.
Yeah, I think if I share how we navigate through the imposter syndrome in the work that we do, we start with clarity. Get clear and make decisions. The clearer you are about what your skill, capability, and experience is, so that's active confidence number 2, articulate and share your value. The clearer you are about what you want and what good looks like. We're always coaching clients to go and have good conversations. And, I'm thinking about a client who had procrastinated for many, many years around whether she was professional services, whether she wanted to move up the partner track. And so she had to make that decision whether it's something that she wanted, and equally whether she was considered by the organization as someone who would be in that partner pipeline. That was the first step. Her ability then to understand her skill, capability, experience, to be able to articulate that back to that example, right? We underestimate our skill, capability, experience, and we overestimate what's required to do a good job. I personally have had that experience regularly. I see it time and time again. You know, women who put their hat in the ring, who have kind of thought have looked at the job description and gone, oh my goodness. And then, you know, 30 days into the role going, oh, is that all you meant by that line in the job description? Oh, I can totally nail that as well. And this third piece around being able to redefine your relationship with fear and failure, so our ability to fall down and get back up again. That's very much our work in terms of how we navigate through that. That's where our deep work is done. For today, what we do want to do is give you a couple of, I guess, simple strategies that allow you to be able to foster this piece around becoming your own best coach, right? One of the design principles and capability uplifts that we have in our work is to help you to become your own best coach. So firstly, you don't have to invest in coaches to support you to navigate through this stuff, but the opportunity that comes when you can build these capabilities in the moment, you're able to talk yourself through, right? In that moment where you've got something to say and fears coming up around looking stupid, being judged, you know, or getting it wrong, we're able to coach ourselves through, which in our world is asking ourselves good questions, right? A coach just asks good questions so that you're able to change the actions you take in that moment. And that's self-regulation, that's self-responsibility. And importantly, that's where we can start to take what we call small acts of confidence and start to change and get evidence, the data set that actually I am ready. You know, I'm not an imposter. I'm as ready as I need to be. The first thing we'll say that is really helpful, especially when you're caught in the moments, is to really slow down. This one sounds simple, and it's so incredibly valuable, right? Imposter syndrome is fueled by rumination. It's fueled by all of those thoughts. It's the self-talk that tends to compound itself, right? The more that self-talk's present, the more focus and rumination we give it, the more that it's going to multiply. And so our ability just to slow down, here we talk a lot about slowing down our breath, but it can be slowing down the pace with which we're talking. It can be slowing down the pace with which we're engaging in a conversation. That might look like opting out and saying, hey, you know what, actually, you know, I'm noticing there's a couple of things that I really want to contribute to this conversation, but I'd really, you know, appreciate some time to, you know, get my thoughts straight. Can we circle back to this tomorrow after I've been able to, you know, reflect on it in the next 24 hours? Our ability just to slow everything down so that we can be aware of what's going on, aware of how things are playing out and not serving us, and then make different choices in the moment. And again, that's not all going to happen the first time you start to slow it down, but it will give you some space to be able to make some different choices, or at least in the moment, be aware of how it's playing out.
Yeah, I think this sounds really simple. When you start practicing it, and this might be your small action step you take as you leave, is as you notice you're starting to get worried about what people think, will I be found out an imposter, is just to slow it down and just remind yourself, if I'm in this room for a reason, and I'm going to contribute what I can. The ability to just keep ourselves de-escalated from that worrying that happens, that what if spiral that goes on in our brain, really important. And part of that can be, as Kate said, slowing down how we're speaking. Sahara, you've asked about, you know, people whose English is not their first language. Do they have more of a problem with imposter syndrome? We definitely see, you know, women and men of colour who speak to this, and people people from other ethnicities and who have language, so feel as though their language skills may not quite meet the dynamic. We do notice, though, that as soon as they slow down their speaking, which actually helps them recalibrate, but it also helps the other people they work with as well. So the slowing down is good for us, and it's good for our interactions. And many of us, you know, who English is our first language, can speak very fast as well. So slowing down is good for all of us.
Yeah, my coaching with women in this space has very much been mindset shifts for them. You know, Australian cultures are full of, you know, various accents, dialects, for example. And so your ability just to slow down a little bit, to Fiona's point, is actually really helpful. I think most of us could all slow down a little bit, and just slowing our breathing down, slowing our physiology, like relaxing our physiology, can be a really useful cue to be able to slow the pace of things down as well. Number 2 is about reality checking. Here we're talking about all of those stories. And we borrow Brené Brown's very helpful strategy here around the stories I'm telling myself is. That technique is very much around presencing beliefs, assumptions, thoughts that are operating in our brain, but maybe we're not consciously aware of. And they're thoughts that are operating in our brain and driving decision making, right? So they are in charge. And so our ability just to reality check, is my understanding of what's expected by my stakeholders to do a good job in this role the same as what they hold, right? Starting to calibrate that a little bit, getting some external data sources. Sometimes our own self-assessment, depending on the context, can be way out of whack, right? The very good example of that is, our ability to assess our own skill, capability, experience. Where part of the challenge, if we're just relying on our own perspective, is, many of us have the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome going on in our head. And so that weakens our own self-perception, our perception of our skill, capability, experience. Whereas stakeholders who, can only observe our contributions we make, the problems we solve, the value we bring, who are observing and assessing our skill, capability, experience based on that data, are not privy to our inner talk, which is a good thing. And so it is helpful to calibrate our own personal feedback with feedback, absolutely, from trusted stakeholders or supporters. And then, when you've got a little bit of courage, it can be helpful to do that with, with some critics, from people who do have different perspectives, not to assess whether they're right, so not to judge them or their thoughts, but actually to learn from their perspectives, because perception is truly, perception very much can define people's reality. And if someone sees something in you by virtue of their own experience, it can be helpful for us to be able to know that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's our intention or that's what we're actually doing. But, I think it's always very interesting. 3 people can show up to a conversation and 3 people can walk away with very different messages, perceptions and outcomes by virtue of just one simple conversation. So that reality check is really powerful. It can look like asking for some feedback from stakeholders, or going and having that conversation, particularly if we use the example of, applying for a promotion opportunity. What does good look like? I'm conscious of us getting to some of your questions. So Fee, I'll let you touch on this one, and then we'll move to some questions.
Beautiful. One of the things we have flagged, and we're going to reiterate it here, is shine a light on your fear, because imposter syndrome is driven by an underlying fear. We need to understand what's going on. Just pushing it down and pretending it's not there, or not examining the fear, actually makes it get bigger and more unmanageable. When we shine a light on the fear, when we actually go there and we look at that worst case scenario and we dig in, we see what we're really frightened about, what's really going on, we say name it to tame it. Once I understand, what that would look like, we can do that, ability to reality check it. And, for instance, if I'm going to be found out to be a fraud, to be a fool, to not have the talent, well, the reality check is that actually going to happen? Like, yes, I may have got this particular fact wrong, or this particular piece wrong, or this little thing that wasn't perfect, but actually that doesn't undermine all that I am. So when we actually look at what our worst case fear is and we reality check it, then we're much more likely to make good decisions and embrace things. We encourage you to right-size the story, because the story in your brain, very often that reactive brain that gets things out of proportion, by the time we get that, we've named the fear and we have right-sized it, where we've got the reality check, we can right-size it, and then it comes to a much more manageable form.
Yeah, and so slowing it down allows us to reality check, allows us to ask the questions, to get more intel, to get more certainty, that immediately, right, starts to decrease the size of how we're holding it in our brain and importantly in our nervous system. Calibrating the fear, checking in, right, with name it to tame it, presencing that allows us to look at that. And when we can combine those 3 steps together, we can really start to look at, okay, what's the truth of my experience right now? From a place of calibration rather than from a place of uncertainty and fear. And when you do that, all sorts of new possibilities might open up. And that's very much the essence of our work, that we can show up, we can say yes, we can take action, even when we don't have 100 or 150% confidence, because we know that the act of confidence comes before the feeling of confidence. I think we'll go to questions, but I really just want to catch this piece, Fanfare. I'll give you a chance just to take a look at some questions because I know they've come in. Is a key philosophy of our work, right? We take an action. On the other side of action, we have more certainty. On this side of action, I have procrastination or hypotheses or just a ton of uncertainty. All I know when I take an action step is that was a good thing to do, that wasn't a good thing to do. Either of those are useful and are more helpful than where I was when I hadn't taken action. So we talk a lot about imperfect action and a lot about consistently taking small, low stakes, safe acts of confidence to fast track our way, to join dots, to calibrate stories, to right size those stories, and importantly, to be able to get more information that allow us to pursue our goals in career and life.
Beautiful. Thanks, Kate. I'll pick up a couple of these comments and questions now, and Kate, I might get you just to pop on the screen some resources that people can access if they'd like to. Jeff, I just wanted to catch your piece comment about that it's really, really powerful to have support. That Kate talked a bit about getting feedback from yourself, but also from others. Having a mentor who can help and support you is really valuable. I imagine that's something that AIPM and WIPN are all across, but certainly looking for those opportunities where you can get feedback that's beyond your own head, because the imposter syndrome is running around in your head. And when someone else can remind you of what you've done and your great work, your contribution, and remind you that actually that imposter syndrome is just an idea in your head, it's really helpful to ground and to shift that.
I might just add the role of mentors and sponsors are really powerful. They often see things because they've got a different perspective, right? You could argue they're a little bit more objective. They can see things in us, and lots of stories and examples of even senior executives who have been encouraged by mentors to apply for promotion opportunities that they didn't think they were ready for. I think what's really curious around mentors and sponsors, because on some level, depending on the role they're playing, some mentors play the role of a sponsor. We often hold that's incredibly valuable, particularly sponsors, because they have access to conversations, often relationships they can leverage. They're in rooms where they can advocate on behalf of you and share your skill, capability, experience that allows others to then go and look for evidence that would support that, or by virtue of the fact that someone else's trusts you and advocates for you, that trust is transferred over to that individual as well. One of the pieces we really hold, and I remember it was quite a senior executive who was sharing her story of only applying for a role, this big promotion opportunity. When she had her mentor said, "You absolutely need to put your hat in the ring," she was like, I know who else is going and I am nowhere near their level of experience. I don't see why I would do that. And of course she did go for the role and she ended up getting it. I was struck by, wouldn't it be great if we could play a little bit of that role for ourselves? So I think sponsors and mentors are really powerful, especially because of the objective nature that they can hold. And if it's a mentor external to your organization, even more so, because really all that what's in it for them is really just supporting you. And there's very few times in our life, in my experience, where someone is giving us advice or supporting us where they've got no vested interests. But certainly a role to play in being able to give us different perspectives.
Yeah. Just want to quickly catch a couple of things. Tony, you made a comment about whether we thought that DEI quotas have contributed to women feeling like imposters and feeling people are thinking about them, they've been engaged, promoted to make up numbers. I think this is a very interesting cultural piece. When we work in organisations where the culture is very clearly supportive, inclusive, collaborative, constructive, that would never be a question because everyone is across, that's not going on. It's when there is some kind of undermining piece that potentially there's messaging that happens. And look, we don't know where we're going at the moment. There seems to be, certainly in the US, some questioning around how DEI will play out. But I think it's really important. It's beholden on leaders in organisations to hold the integrity and the purposefulness of why we have quotas, why we do it. And we know that systemically women have been underrepresented due to Lisa's point, a lot of unconscious bias. A lot of what's gone on previously has been very driven by that unconscious bias. We do talk a little bit about that in our book, Lisa, but we actually talk a lot about gender bias as a factor that has actually meant that although everybody, that there are representatives across all genders who experience imposter syndrome, we see it so markedly with women. And that really does speak to some of that unconscious bias.
Only the only comment I'd add is, and I can only share from the experience of women we've worked with and talked with, most of those women feel like they've gotten that promotion on their own merit, right? So many of the women who are in dynamics where maybe they're considered a diversity hire, right? And it's consignaled that. Their frustration is not that they think it is, it's that there's stakeholders around them potentially for whom are holding that perspective. And so then it's about working with them to not let those comments, those beliefs undermine them, to be able to go in and continue to do the good job that they're there to do, and to just, show that they've got the capability as well.
Fiona has asked a question, but I'm really conscious, Karen, that we're probably just about out of time. So I need to hand back to you. But Fiona, there is a huge body of work that talks to that, and we do reference it in our book.
Thank you, Fiona and Kate. My observation, because I'm going to add it in because I can, is I think organisations miss out when imposter syndrome is in play, because there are people who are self-aware, and because often with self-awareness comes imposter syndrome, not always, but often. And I think organisations really miss out because those people aren't putting themselves forward. Those overconfident zealots who actually have no self-awareness at all and therefore aren't good leaders will never hold themselves back. And not that everybody that gets promoted is one of those people, of course, but there are times when you see someone get into a role and you go, oh my God, but they're awful at managing people. But they sold themselves so well because they don't have any lack of confidence. So yeah, I totally agree with where you're coming from. It took me a long time to learn how to turn around to the voice in my head and say, shut up. It's still there, but I just tell it to shut up, or just totally ignore it. Thank you both for your time, Fiona and Kate. There are a number of upcoming WIPM events. The first of those is the Women in Leadership Summit, in Project Leadership Summit, that's going to be held in Canberra in a couple of weeks. For those of you who are AIPM members, just keep an eye out on your email or on LinkedIn, and you'll see the upcoming events get advertised. Kate and Fiona have kindly provided some information here. They're also going to provide that to me, and we will shortly have the WIPM webpage up on the AIPM website, and this information will be repeated there so that our members can grab hold of it. I encourage you to check out this information, particularly if you're like me and still suffering from imposter syndrome. There's nothing better than finding new ways to challenge yourself and tell yourself to get over yourself.
Great advice, Karen. Thank you for having us. We've so enjoyed being with you and your community.
Thank you. Thank you so much again. And thank you all for joining us. I'll see you all again next time. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, team. Bye.